Guys, welcome back to the Macro Golf YouTube channel. Here today with Levi Smith, golf coach, and we're talking about the movement of the body in the golf swing. So exactly how the body moves to create the golf swing. We're not going to talk too much about technical positions of the golf club and head necessarily. We're going to be thinking more about the body, how the body moves, and we'll talk a little bit about some restrictions you might have that be affecting the way that your body moves in the golf swing. So Levi, I don't know if you want to just introduce yourself to the guys, let us know who you are, where you come from. Bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So my name's Levi Smith, here at Chadwell Springs, been here for 5 years now. Been a pro for just over 10 years. Feel like I've got a really kind of like quite a good understanding and feeling of what we're going to be talking about today with Joe and sort of like TPI background, and it's going to be a good conversation, obviously
For
talking
sure.
about sort of what we need to be doing really in the backswing, downswing, and sort of like, you know, how we can prevent injuries as well.
100%, and I think we'll talk a little bit about what issues we might see when people have certain restrictions, how that changes how the body moves, and also some common mistakes that you see in golfers that are coming to you.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
We are here at Chadwell Springs today, so if you hear some planes flying over, it's pretty typical for this area, so if there's a bit issue with the sound, we'll try and manage that. But Levi, I'll step out of the way now. I don't know if you want to just start with maybe setup and then talking about how the body moves and different things, and I'll jump in as we go.
Yeah,
so
of course.
You know, full swing, and then we can talk a little bit about how that might change with chipping and pitching and different stuff.
Yeah, of course. So we've got to definitely differentiate the difference between short game and long game. So if we have a look at like throwing a ball, a short game would be more underarm throw. So we obviously want to get a lot more finesse, the ball flight being quite soft. Whereas we look at long game, it would be much more of an overarm throw. So we want the ball coming off fast, we want it coming off quick. And really like how we can set up to that is with short game, we want it obviously, like I said, coming off soft, we'd be in quite tight, standing up a little bit taller, grip pressure might be a bit looser because obviously we want the club to be falling a little bit more as well. And then with long game, we're going to have a little bit further stance, a little bit more pressure into the ground, and how we would apply that is a little bit more hinged from the pelvis, feeling that the chest is a little bit lower, feeling that the glutes and the hamstrings and the quads are a little bit more active, being a bit more on top of it, and that would be kind of like the difference in setup, really, of structure.
Already, I don't know, we're a couple of minutes in, that's already a big nugget for me in information. I've never actually thought of it as the difference between overhand and underhand. That just makes sense. I think when you come in for short game, it's like a softer feeling in the body maybe, stance is a little bit softer, it's less about generating speed and generate power and more about, I suppose, more about finesse and more about touch, like you said there.
100%, yeah, definitely.
That's a really good distinction. I've never heard that before, so that's interesting for me. So going from setup then, I'll stand out and move out the way. How does the body then start to load as we start to work through into backswing motion and start to initiate backswing? What does that look like?
Of course, yeah. So really, in setup position, we want to be 50-50. So some golf coaches are going to look at this a little bit differently. Like, you know, we've seen, obviously, with the long drive, some players might even start on their left side. They might then, let's say, get off into left side, using the ground, using sort of like centrifugal forces to really kind of like, almost like pulling a sword out of the ground. But really, we're going to be talking more about kind of like how the sort of general fundamentals here of somebody that can come up to the range and improve, somebody that's a 15 handicapper rather than somebody that's trying to hit it 400 yards competing. So 50-50 into the ground. Weight shouldn't be on the toes or on the heels, it should be as central as possible, so really kind of like on the laces. And when we start moving off into the movement and we start creating this stretch, I like to call it the stretch phase, right? Of where we start moving off, where we are biomechanically going to start seeing the weight transfer is going to go from around the big toe through to the little toe into the heel. So you'll see that this knee, this thigh and this hip will start working around and up. So when you create this stretch, almost like if I've got a smash ball or some kind of band and I try and get this stretching from my left foot, from my hands, and try and get it really stretching away from my chest, almost into that wall where Joe is, you can see that the weight has gone naturally into the right side. And because I'm creating this stretch,
show us. I want to see it. You spoke about the band, you got me tempted.
Yeah, definitely.
Show us what that looks like. This is good visual actually for what you're trying to explain here of how we lengthen from kind of left foot up through right shoulder, right? So we're 100%. Trying to get this kind of lengthening. I talk a lot about this in the mobility side of people forget how important kind of inside of left thigh is in the golf swing.
Of course, 100%.
And I want to see this as a visual. I think it's pretty cool for the guys to see.
Definitely. So it's always great that when you can use things like bands and things like that, because rather than thinking of a golf swing, not everybody knows what a golf swing should look like or feel like, but I feel like if you then go into another form of instruction, like throwing a ball or jumping or using a band, everybody understands it easier, whether they're a professional or whether they're a beginner that's coming into the sport.
Yeah,
so that's kind of a win for us as instructors. So left foot is going to be on top of the band, and then we're going to get into golf posture. Band is then going to go into the hands, and we're going to grip it like a club. And what we're going to feel is that the body stays relatively centered, so the head's not really going to move too much, but we're going to get the feeling that the band is getting pulled away, chest tight, and as far away from the chest as possible. So naturally my weight has moved into my right side. I haven't lost the stability in my ankles. It's still nice and stable in the floor, but you can see it even in my t-shirt. The stretch has then been pulled around and up through the diaphragm into really sort of like loading up the bigger muscles, injury prevention, which is good.
For sure. So this is kind of like the initial phase of loading, right? So we're initially
100%.
trying to create some kind of load and some kind of tension, some kind of pressure that eventually can be released further down the line. So it's almost like, using the band is a good analogy, we're almost starting to create that stretch.
Yeah,
starting
definitely.
to create that tension being built, which we're going to use later on.
Correct. Yeah.
What issues do you start to see people come in with that? So I don't want to spend too much time on every piece, but I think it's quite important. So
yeah, and I
what
think
would typically be the problems?
I think the question that you've just asked is actually sometimes more important than the first question, because injury prevention for us golf coaches, I think if we can get the player enjoying the sport, but also as well not getting them injured, that's just as important, right? So if we then start getting players that start using their skeleton to lift the band, or we start incorporating the wrong muscles into it, we start seeing things like reverse C shapes. We start seeing, the weight backing up onto the right side, which is obviously what we're after, but it's how we've done it. So we're starting to see like the belt buckle move too far over, let's say, onto the right foot. The lumbar spine has then sort of like been a bit compromised because of, like you can see, this reverse C shape. We can't really get this band away from us as what we'd like to, and it almost gets pulled in a little bit too much. So you can see that my right elbow hasn't really quite got that space as what the first demonstration was. It almost gets stuck behind the rib cage. We're getting ourselves into a little bit of a tied knot here.
Nice. So show us the bad and show us the good.
Let's
see the difference between those two, and then we'll move on to the next.
So I'll jump straight into a bad one, and then I'll quickly fix it. That would be more the better one. So you can see my body shape has completely changed. My arms have lengthened, and I've really kind of like got the pressure out of my lower spine straight back into more the core, which is obviously where we want it.
And I suppose guys can do this at home, right? They can use that drill there to feel how this body is moving.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a good awareness tool, right?
Yeah, so I think you can really, really improve by practicing 10, 15 minutes a day. And it doesn't have to be 15 minutes in one go. It could be a 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. That kind of broken down into intervals. So you can do this at home. You can do this at the range. You could do this in nets, in the gym. Obviously, we bang on with people doing this. It doesn't have to be on the golf course. It doesn't have to be at the range.
And the key is feeling this stretch, right? So this is just coming back to that drill one more time so you guys can understand. So it's turn, stretch, and feel this lengthening, right? Using the band.
Definitely. It's definitely trying to get the feeling that the hands, almost like, let's say if my hands, let's say that there's a wall to my side, and I get into, let's say, my posture, right hand's going to go, let's say, onto the chest, left hand's going to go underneath my chest. I'm almost going to try and stretch out towards that wall.
And we see this stretch come
as I stay relatively centered. That's where it's then really kind of like pulling around and up. So really, like I said, injury prevention, but really loading up.
Love it. Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about backswing and loading and building this stretch. So I assume the next part is some kind of transitional stage where we're going to start to load the power the other way and start to release this power a little bit. So how does the body work when we do this? What areas are we starting to see happen, and what areas are starting to activate and power up as we start to move away from this stretch position and start to kind of transfer this power back down to the golf ball?
Of course, yeah. And I think if you look at other sports, or you look at other activities that we do, so, throwing a punch in boxing or throwing a ball, we start to see something called counter rotation. So if you listen to somebody like Kev Duffy, who I think is one of the best out there for for biomechanics and things like that, he talks heavily about stretching in the backswing, counter rotation in transition. So what is quite interesting. I think rather than listening to people that are very, very good at what they do, like Kev or like Mark Ball, I think if you actually watch players do it, it's sometimes just as sort of like, learn it, it's easier to learn. So if you look at players like Rory, I think Rory's so good at it that when we look at sort of counter rotation and when it sort of tends to happen is where the stretch ends up sort of like finishing, the loading finishes in the backswing when the hands and arms are sort of like chest height. And then what happens after that is that we start getting a little bit, we obviously the golf swing doesn't really stop there. It travels a little bit longer, and that's mainly through momentum. Thank you. So if I give you that, mate. Thank you. Right, so we get it, let's say, into this position here, which is, like I said, stretch phase, and this is end of stretch phase. The body's finished loading at this point, and then it will carry on, like I said, through momentum, but we're already prepping for downswing. That is counter rotation phase, right? So that is where we start creating things like separation between the top half and the lower half. So the weight finishes in the backswing on the right side, and then it starts going off into this left side. It starts then working around and down. So I can give you obviously some good exercises for that.
Yeah, we speak a lot in the tests that we do macro golf about dissociation and being able to disassociate the hips from the torso.
Yeah.
And it's a key movement. I mean, people that become very, very stiff across the lower back, stiff across the abs, struggle to separate. They can't separate, and they're basically just one big plank of wood. Yeah. And that whole thing moves together. And, at setup, you won't notice it. Sometimes in the backswing, you might notice it a little bit, but it's this point that it's going to kick off. And when we start to, realise that we don't have movement here, it's this transition, and counter rotation that's going to really suffer, right? So
definitely, 100%.
We've obviously got loads of exercises we would give people on the physical side.
Yeah.
What would you give people on technical side if they were struggling a little bit with this kind of producing this dissociation, counter rotation movement? What type of things can we do?
Yeah, so really with the counter rotation, what we start to see and what sort of muscle groups tend to then take place. Let's say if I was through demonstration going to hold this into the end of stretch phase, we will then start seeing this left side of the rib cage, the left hip, the left knee start opening up to where I can then really start feeling this oblique really tighten up, really kind of stretch. So left arm gets parallel, this then starts to open up. We then can apply some force down into the ground, like I'm trying to squash something underneath my shoe. And then that will then start bringing the club down, but we've got to be quite careful of the next thing that happens. If I borrow that band...
Tell me now, I'm keen for this next bit. Show me the next bit. I've got a question on that already.
Of course, yeah.
I will ask it now then. So a lot of the drills that you're talking about here, and this maybe is a theme of your coaching, or maybe just the way the conversation's gone today, is very much getting the golfer to feel what that movement should be like, right?
Yeah,
so
correct.
You're using tools to increase their awareness of what it should feel like.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
100%.
the process, what you're trying to go through here?
Exactly that, because the thing is, not every player should know what the golf swing should look like. But I think as coaches, even on your part, because you're obviously a coach yourself, when we instruct people, it's very much to say, right, okay, what do you feel? This is what we're after. We're after a feel. So using cameras, using mirrors and things like that, getting that instant feedback for how things feel. Because like, if a player comes into me and they say, I can feel it in my lower back, that's feedback.
Yeah.
If a player says, I can feel it really, really loading up into my obliques, my diaphragm, things like that, that's feedback.
Yeah.
So we're after good positive or even negative, because the negative is going to obviously tell us what's wrong, but the positive also is going to tell us what's right. So,
and I suppose you might get some people say, I feel nothing. Don't know what I'm feeling.
Yeah,
don't know what I'm meant to
100%.
feel. That type of thing. So we're trying to create some kind of positive feelings of what they're trying to get,
Definitely.
right? Interesting.
Yeah, so this counter rotation phase, right, is very, very important. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll borrow that club off for you again, mate. Thank you. So I'm just going to tie the club up into this band, just as like a good demonstration, right? So I'm going to load it up into stretch phase, and then when this starts getting pulled this way, it's going to want to pull the club too much towards the golf ball, let's say. So too much laterally, too much to the side. It's very, very important that we keep the stretch in the band. So almost feeling that it's getting pushed away that way. That's going to help with hand path, but also as well, that's going to help with things like release. It's going to help with things like speed. Also as well, it's going to help keep things like the top half there. Because let's say if I did a bad one where I got into this position here, we got good counter rotation phase, but the handle started going this way, you're going to start seeing that we're going to start running out of room and a little bit of space, which is then going to really compromise our time. So I feel like if we really kind of like stretch it up into the backswing, we start getting this good counter rotation phase, but we keep the band away and stretched. So almost looking more into that position there as we keep the wrist angles. So that's really loading up into here. This is where from here, we can create that extension phase through. Naturally, we get that.
Nice. Yeah, I do a bit of a demonstration actually with the.
Oh, sorry,
with the
mate.
band.
Yeah, go on.
With what we try and explain to people when we teach this as a physical, is we try and say if you had the band, if you've created stretch, and then just let the band go, there's not a lot of tension there.
No,
right?
of course.
Whereas if we can create the stretch like we did in the backswing, and then create more
Even
stretch,
more, correct.
That's when we get the power.
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
it's people understand that the first bit of stretch is just half the job. We still then need to
100%.
just create that extra bit of stretch, create that bit of power. And the best in the world do that, right?
100%.
The best in the world do it, but also the fastest in the world do it. And it's a good tool for us to get. And for sure, one thing we know in terms of sequencing, we know that if we can sequence with that kind of initial starting move, again, it's a common thing for the best players in the world. All the best players in the world do that.
You've hit the nail on the head. So I really like using the word sequencing, because at the end of the day, golf swing shouldn't really be about timing because the ball's not moving. So sequencing is everything, really. Because look, as a good player, you should be able to hit the ball with a blindfold on. Right? It's what Pete, but it's what Pete Cowan talks about all the time. So it's understanding sort of how the muscle structure works, how the skeleton works, and it's being able to then sort of like deliver the blow in the same place every time.
Yeah.
Look, me as a boxer, let's say, and I've put a punch bag there, shouldn't have to think about where the punch bag is. It's not moved.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? But if the bag's moving around, 100%, I've got to take my glasses off and see where it's at.
Skill, right?
100%.
Reactive skill. So we've spoken about creating a stretch, spoke about starting to get this counter rotation work going. Now we're getting the club working down towards impact, down towards delivery. How does the body adjust to basically create optimal impact? What happens through that transition? We've kind of had this transitional period. Now, as we're starting to work down, how does the body work? How does the body adjust?
Yeah, of course, So the third phase at the free is extension. So when we spoke about like boxing and we spoke about, any kind of like throwing, really we need to create some extension for it, right? And that is really what's going to deliver the blow into it. So it's all good creating stretch, all good creating counter rotation. But I feel like we get extension for free with a better movement of the prior two.
I like that, yeah.
But at the same time, we still can mess up, because it's just human nature. We do.
And again, is that a sequencing thing that you generally see when this is going incorrect? Because if you've got someone to throw a ball or to do whatever, they probably would extend. Most people with some athletic ability would extend. So do we feel like people panic because they want to make contact with the golf ball and that 100%. Changes their movement? Do they feel like they get out of sync because they kind of lose where the club is? What does that look like when it goes wrong, and then what should it look like?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, of course. And like sequencing again. But at the same time, you've got things like skill acquisition.
Yeah.
And when you go from other sports, like there's a player that I've taught for a good few years now. Really struggled with the concept of don't hit at the ball. Mm-hmm. And he's had coaching in Singapore, he's had coaching in China, he's had coaching in the States, absolutely everywhere, and he's still struggling with the concept of don't hit at the ball. So yeah, it is a bit of skill acquisition. It is definitely a bit of mental side of it, but at the same time, I feel like if we can start using the body a little bit more and leave the arms, because the arms have got to be involved, right? The arms are what creates the speed, the body's what creates the power. But if I show you through demonstration what we can even do through extension, right? So when I said to you about skill acquisition, sometimes even getting a player going, if I can go, let's say, to hip height and say, right, okay, I want this ball to go as far as I can, we're going to see some form of pressing into the ground, we're going to see some rotation, but we're also going to see some form of like pushing and jumping, which is that extension, right? So if I show you through demonstration, right? So this is a 60 degree. I'm just going to move it here. And that is extension. So you can see the ball's gone relatively high, relatively far, just for a 60 degree hip height.
Yeah.
But that's more using things like the nervous system, I feel. So I'm not going to be that static. So if I go through that a little bit deeper, so let's say if I'm in this position here, I'm not going to be static as I go and hit it now. I'm actually going to be feeling it in my feet, trying to feel that I can feel the ground, bit of weight shift. It's the same as what we've been talking about. You wouldn't just stand here as you're trying to hit the longest ball you can hit. You would be prepping into this left side to then actually almost like get a little bit of a head start.
Yep.
same as this kind of movement. So I feel like if we work it up into like, let's say hip height, you're going to see me sort of like messing around with my feet a little bit, trying to get a bit of feel. And then almost like as the club starts coming down, the club's almost being left alone as I then start pushing down into the ground. So through demonstration, if I go here.
I will just say, because they can't see, it's scary how far that ball's gone. Yeah, I mean, it just shows, right?
Yeah, well, it's got about 80 yards, to be fair. 70, 80 yards, 60 degree, range ball.
It's pretty good. So let's get a little bit deeper into actually what's going on in the body as we do that then. So you talk about extension.
Yeah.
What's extending? What's not extending? Because there's also some areas that potentially go into flexion as we extend one way. And how does the body then adjust to create that delivery? Because it's quite a precise movement, right? To be able to get the club to bottom out at the right time at such speed with such motion. So
of course,
what's extending? What's dropping down? What are we seeing start to work here? As we get from that top position.
And this is the thing. So you've asked a good question there, because it's like you said, it's very easy to then jump up and sort of like brace, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when we look at extension, what should be extended? Well, near enough everything, near enough. But we should be trying to stay a little bit in posture, obviously, because there's no point in going here and go right, extend up. We start to extend up, the shaft gets too vertical and things like that. So really, a lot of it's being applied in the ground through your feet, and kinetically, it's then getting applied all the way up, even through your chest. So really, like I always like talking about delivery position. It's not impact; it's before impact. And I say to every player, you've got to try and do things earlier, because if you leave it too late, you're not going to have enough time. So I feel like if we can get it down into delivery, and delivery being like, let's say, where the shaft's parallel to the ground, or even just before we can use that sort of like that term, that is where we've got loads of time to then really kind of like use the ground. So we can go even deeper into that and say sort of like we're using the left foot to really kind of like push into the ground and kind of like push in a certain direction to where the foot's then going to move. We create we call it a rainbow effect, to where that then gets out of the way. You see some of the best players in the world, their left foot doesn't finish like this.
Yep.
It finishes more like this. Even on like a 7-iron for some players, like Patrick Reed moves loads. Even on an 8-iron, 9-iron. It's just trying to get out the way. That's the key thing. Because I feel like if we get stuck and we brace and we jump, that's where we have no space and we've got no time.
It's very interesting, because in the strength and conditioning world, we talk about triple extensions. So we talk about ankle, knee, hip, triple extending. There's a lot of exercises get given to golfers that are triple extension exercises, for example, jumping onto a box or jumping high, counter movement jumps. And I have seen some players suffer from being programmed specifically this kind of triple extension move. Maybe they want to build speed, maybe they want to increase their ground reaction forces. And actually the feeling of this type of extension is actually, it's not that directly used in the golf. It's different. The way that you were moving there was definitely more a rotational extension, but you're right, everything extends, but it extends round and through to create this robo. So sometimes I see players extend this way, and this way you're talking about getting stuck here, and I just find it very fascinating the way that we kind of have this extension. Everything does extend, but it's very much happening on kind of one side and one plane. And if you actually look at kind of pelvis angles and spine angles, it's definitely not a neutral kind of up-down.
Yeah, no doubt, 100%.
But sometimes people feel like they need to create that up-down movement. This is how people hit the ball further. They kind of jump up and they try and create speed that way. So it's really interesting watching you demo that from behind. I thought it was actually quite interesting to see the way that changed.
And you've hit the nail on the head there. So like really, when we look at the golf swing, if we think of like a spring or a coil, Pete Cowan looks at spiral. So when we think of around and up and then down and around. So when I said to you about things happening earlier, let's say if we went down the line with this camera, and I then obviously worked it up into, let's say, stretch phase, which is more here. And like I said to you, it's going to travel further because of momentum. But when we then get it down into, let's say, counter rotation phase, which is going to be here, you notice that I actually created even a little bit more space. What Joe was obviously saying is like, I'm not going down this way for it. I know he was talking more about extension, but when this starts, let's say, getting pressured, this will then start creating, like I said, more space. Because your weight on your left foot is going from your toes more down to, let's say, the heel area. Not quite the heels, but it's going down a little bit closer to the heel area. So this space that I've got here actually sort of increases. And then when we go off into extension phase, we've got loads and loads of room there. So the handle's then working left, The club head's obviously working left because it's following it, but we've got loads and loads of space. Because the key thing is to obviously rotate for impact to keep the face stable. That's how you have club face control.
And that's why this left side extension
happens as a consequence, really, through that.
Exactly. Yeah. It looks very much like we've gone this way, but we've basically just extended as we rotate, which then creates this illusion of like excessive side bend, basically.
And the butt follows, because obviously the butt carries on going down. This is going to go down early, but the butt goes down and then it gets pulled out the ground. So technically, this is going down, this is going up, because otherwise that would just bottom out very early.
Pure speed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
Love it. So we've spoken a little bit about some of the issues, so that's good. As we then work through impact, what does the body do to then clear and remain stable? I think it's quite a, it's generally a consequence of what's happened earlier on, but it's quite interesting to see how the body then kind of withstands that pressure and manages to hold a nice neutral kind of posture at the end, right? So what do you like to see when they've exited? Do you like to see players, holding off finishes? Do you like to see players wrapping the club around the back of their neck? What do you like to see in terms of how the body should be moving and now, I suppose, bracing and finishing that move, right? Yeah,
of course, yeah. And you've said a key word there, consequence, right? So let's say if I get a player that first comes in and sees me and they've got, like, let's say this chicken wing position of this left arm, they have to do that, because if this arm's straightened, where this elbow and forearm and this shoulder gets into a certain position, if it carried on going straight, it'd dislocate.
Yeah, well, it just wouldn't make contact, right?
It just wouldn't make contact, exactly. So the issue is you have to look at what's happening before that. There's no point in looking at, you've got a chicken wing, let's fix the chicken wing. Just get a bit of duct tape, put it on. But yeah, it's just not the case. So we've got to look at things that happen prior to it. So let's say good stretch phase, good counter rotation. The extension phase is what's going to give you your finish. But yeah, it really, really kind of depends on what kind of like flight you want. Because if you want to hit the ball low, you want to finish low. If you want to hit the ball high, you want to finish really, really high. You want the club head to almost like overtake the hands a little bit. You want to be finishing a lot softer. So through demonstration, if I hit a really, really low shot, so this is a 60 degree again. So it's come out quite low, quite flighted. So wind's not really going to touch that much, right? But if this is going to come in a lot higher, it's a completely different flight. That one's got a bit more spin on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a quarter of the height, right? I mean, it's not a small amount.
No, no. And we don't need a GC quadrotella set either.
No, and I think what this leads us on to nicely, which is I've had conversations with other people in the past, and there's a video on this, and I'll tag it above, is very much walking into that golf shot with some intent.
Yeah,
because
that's
I think that actually the intent that you've got over that golf shot will change a lot of what we've spoken about. However, I feel like a lot of these first portions are going to be pretty consistent. Is that a fair comment, that maybe it's just this kind of last portion of delivery and kind of setup maybe that would then dictate that, and the kind of the end portion is then the consequence of all that stuff that you've done previously?
Yeah. Exactly.
Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think intent is such an important word, because if you look at other sports, right, you look at like snooker, right?
Yeah.
So let's say if somebody's trying to pot a red and they're trying to get onto a certain colour, they pot the ball, but then the white ball's kind of like not really in position. People might think, it's a great pot, but he's more intending to get on for the next colour. So when we look at golf, it's all good saying like hitting a nice high draw, but if you're trying to play a low fade, it's not really what you was intended to do. But it's easier to say more in short game, actually. So let's say if I was trying to play a bunker shot, if I was, sort of like middle of a bunker, not a difficult shot, middle flag, and I tried to play like a check and release shot, but I fatted it. It landed just on the front edge and it rolled out to 3 foot. My playing partners are probably thinking, great shot. But really, in the back of my head, it wasn't. It wasn't a great strike. It wasn't the flight that I was after. It didn't check and release. It was a fat and roll.
Yeah.
So next time I go into a bunker, I'm not going to be thinking that positive. So it's all about intent at the end of the day.
And I suppose just to ask a question on that specifically then is, from everything we've spoken about today about setup, with the backswing, with the transition that we spoke about, coming impact and everything past it, how does intent change that movement so much? And are you someone who would maybe favour trying to be a little bit more consistent with, therefore, shot selection? Or would you say that actually there's some things we can change in setup? At what point would you, I suppose my question is, how much of everything we've spoken about would you be willing to change shot by shot?
Yeah.
Consciously, and how much would be done by setup an intent, or would you just have the intent to let the body move? Like, where do you stand with that? Because I think
yeah, of course. I think it's yet again skill acquisition again. Every player is different. So, a player like myself, you know, I would change a little bit in my setup. So, yeah, it's intention of setup.
Yeah.
It wouldn't necessarily be grip, but it might be things like alignment. But we also know that, let's say if I hit a fade, it might go up a little bit more than obviously what a draw is going to do. So yeah, it's very much determined on where the flag is, what the wind's doing, the lie, obviously, the circumstances. Because like if I'm in a tournament and it's a back left flag, and I've, you know, let's say if I'm leading 18th hole and it's out of bounds long, I'm not even entertaining it. I'm going to be going more middle of the green, so I might even land it short of the green, let it run on. But if it's, you know, if I've got to hit a miracle shot and, you know, take the flag out, then I will be hitting that sort of like that shot that's going to be a bit more aggressive. So it depends on circumstances, but really as a technical kind of standpoint, I think it really comes down to the individual. So some people might even want to do it in their golf swing a little bit more. I've heard loads of players go, I know even Padraig Harrington, watching it on one of his videos not long ago, and he was saying, right, as a fade, I'm going to keep my setup the same, but I'm going to feel that my takeaway's out here a bit more, and I feel that I cut across it that little bit more. You can see it there even as the flight. That's how you can fade it. Whereas for someone like myself, I might look at that and think, could even bring a shank in, you know?
Yeah.
I would rather almost try and get my movements the same as what I do, just mess around my setup. So open up my body just a little bit. Club face is going to be a little bit further left than the target, but a little bit further right than the setup. So somewhere like middle ground. And then I would kind of like mess around with that and try and hit the fade that way. So it just very much depends on the individual, but you can do both really there.
Love it. Good. Anything else you think we haven't spoken about today?
There's more.
I know there's more. We'll do loads more videos.
There's more. Always more.
We will. I thought it was super informative. I think the guys will really enjoy that. I think that was just a really good kind of in-depth but bit of an overview on these. Thinking less about positions and thinking more about stages. I think of the golf swing, and thinking less about the club head and more about the body,
more phases.
Phases rather than positions.
So though you said stages, you can use different words, stages or phases. So what me and Joe was saying off camera, sorry to cut you off, mate, is that I think when you rely on positions too much, it's always good to look at positions when you're running through them. If you just keep pausing in positions, we just got to remember that golf swing isn't really kind of like a slideshow. Yeah. It should just be more, these are the positions that he got into while he was on the way of moving his body correctly. Yeah. It's absolutely fine, and I completely agree with pausing at certain points. Because really, when we look at stretch phase, what would we do in a stretch? We would hold it. And then we would start sort of like figuring out what the body should be doing from there. So it's absolutely fine going through them stages or phases, definitely.
It's a nice way to think about it. Yeah, I like that a lot. We'll do some extra videos on, maybe we break these down individually and talk a little bit more detail.
Yeah, definitely, 100% we can do that.
And we didn't even get to touch on how some mobility restrictions or weaknesses or lack of flexibility in some areas would affect these, so we'll do that as well. Guys, where does everyone find you then, Levi? Where's the best place? Instagram, online?
Instagram is Levi Smith Golf. Chadwell Springs is where I teach. So if you want to hit me up on that, drop me a message or come and see me. Just
going to have loads of random swing videos coming in your inbox now. Get ready for that.
Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Looking forward to it.
Levi, thanks so much, man.
No, pleasure, mate.
Good to see you.
As always, pleasure.
And guys, I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.